Well, there is a book that needs to be written. It would be titled How to Maneuver, How to Be Successful in the Changing Tides of Sports in the Industry That It Is. And it will be written by my guest today, Tom Webb. Maybe it hasn't been written, maybe it will, maybe it's in publishing, but this guy has done so much in the industry of sports, and we're going to share his story. Now working in pickleball, chief marketing officer at the APP here, and he joins me on the Onto Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley, a pickleball broadcaster, also a commentator for Tennis Channel. Tom, this is a place where we're going to learn not just about obviously what we've done career-wise, but learn about you from a personal standpoint as well. Really get to show your personality. So I appreciate you being a part of this.
Well, I'm delighted to join you, and thank you for the opportunity. This is great. I'm excited to talk with you.
I'm excited as we start off this conversation to ask you, what are you best known for as a player on the pickleball court?
Being terrible. I've been lucky enough to work in a few different sports, and one of the things that I've always said is my job is not to be good at the sports that I communicate about. So whether that was in Formula One or in soccer or in ski, snowboard, or any of those, when somebody says to me, "What do you like?" I'm like, I don't need to be any good at this. I just need to make sure that I can help make stars of the people that I work with. So I'm a very, very bad pickleball player, but that means I can only get better.
Well, sure, but you are very good at a lot of different things when it comes to growing the sport of pickleball. Where do you find your strengths? Specifically, we'll talk about this in the industry as a whole, but the way in which you're going to be able to really take the APP into a new dimension with your experiences and the visions that you have.
So I think we're very lucky within the APP because there's a few things going for us. One is obviously the explosive growth of the sport of pickleball. We just announced that 36.5 million people played at least once in 2021, 2022. So you've already got this enormous inbuilt audience. That means you've got a lot of people that are willing to engage with what you want to do, which is great. That gives us a really good platform to work within. I'm also extremely lucky to be part of an organization that is majority owned by Intersport, Chicago-based sports agency who are some of the best in the business. They really know what they're doing. So, whether it's from TV production to event production to brand marketing, creative, you name it, they've got experts within that organization. So I am able, therefore, to call upon the skills, talents, and experience of a very wide range of people who've been there, seen it, and done it. So when we're talking about a marketing plan for the APP, my thinking is validated by some people who really know what they're talking about. So I'm not working in a vacuum. I'm not working, alone. I'm working with some very, very smart people. And I think the greatest thing that we have going for us is that the vision that we have for the APP is something that a large group of us share, and they're putting the resources in place to be able to achieve the goals that we're setting. Pickleball deserves to be treated like a major league sport. It deserves to be talked about as an elite sport. And to get it to that level, you need to apply elite sport levels of thinking and doing to be able to give the players the opportunity to be considered and talked about in the same breath as their fellow elite athletes. That means putting great content creators in positions where they can tell great stories about the players, about the events, and about the pickleball world in general. It means putting great creatives in positions where they can apply some really smart thinking to how we present ourselves from a graphic perspective. So across the board, it means giving us the opportunity to, I use the word, unleash creative talents on our sport. And I think by doing that and by applying some smart strategic thinking allied to a good plan, we'll be able to elevate this sport to the level where it should be at.
When you consider what you just said, all of the other leagues, soccer, America's Cup, Olympics, beyond that you've worked in previously, and you mentioned the art of storytelling, considering how you were able to implement that in other things in the past with other leagues and other sports properties that you've been associated with, what's going to be unique about the way in which pickleball storytelling can be unleashed, unlike any other sport, any other league that you've been a part of.
So I think the unique thing that we have going for us within the APP is we're not just talking about professional athletes. We have within APP events feature hundreds, if not thousands, of competitive players every single time we go out. We have an event in Daytona Beach, Florida, which will feature nearly 1,200 players. Of them, 750 amateurs, 350 pros. So you immediately, therefore, have a very wide range of talents that you can call upon and people who've got interesting stories to tell. An MLS team has a first team, maybe has a second team, it has a youth academy, but you're talking about maximum probably 100 players. We have just at one tournament alone, we could have 1,100, 1,200 people who've all got a good story to tell. So that's just in the competitive leagues. When you then add in the 36.5 million people who've played the sport at least once, and nearly 18 million people who are playing a couple of times or more a year, you've then got this enormous range of people who you can go to and say, tell us what stories you want to share with us. So you could look at that from a long form perspective. If I'm a documentary filmmaker, I can go around and I can find a story in every single city of somebody who's got something really amazing to tell you. I can then cut that down to a 30-second TikTok video, and we can find narratives that will fit that platform as well, which are engaging. So I think the really unique thing here is the scope of the potential audience who can give us those kind of storytelling opportunities.
What in a story, Tom, captivates your attention the most that you can't take your eyes off when you begin to learn about a story? What is it, the contents of it, that really lure you in?
I think everyone has an interesting story to tell, but I think really what you need to do to unearth that story is say yes. So I was lucky enough to go to drama school for a while. I didn't do the traditional college route that people do over here. Probably wasn't applied enough, or maybe not smart enough to get into one of the kind of British universities, British schools. But I went to drama school for a while, thought I was going to be an actor, very quickly realized I wasn't as good at acting as many of the people around me. But we did improvisation classes at drama school. And one of the things that teaches you is say yes. If you say no to somebody, you immediately stop the conversation. Look how this conversation's flowing. That's because you've got a talent for picking up on what somebody said and then saying yes and asking the next question. Yeah. So I think that everybody has a story to tell, but it's the ability to be able to find something interesting in possibly what may be mundane, but possibly maybe what really is interesting. The Hollywood story arc of you establish and then good, bad, and the way that the story arc works is a classic form of storytelling. But I think that if you listen to what people are telling you, you can find something interesting in everybody. Some maybe have more confidence in telling you something that they think is really interesting. Some may need to have that dragged out of them. But I think in our position as people who create content and create content that should be engaging, shareable, I think it's incumbent on us to say yes and find those pieces of engaging storytelling that perhaps other people may not find.
What was the way in which you said yes to your birthday gift when you were 10 years old?
That's a great question. I'm delighted you asked that. So 10-year-old boy living in England, growing up in England. I was very lucky that my parents took me abroad a bit and we traveled a little bit, me and my two younger brothers. But my father gave me on my 10th birthday an envelope for my present. And I was extremely disappointed to find that it wasn't a large box containing a new bicycle or a soccer ball or whatever else, 10-year-old boys want. But it was a letter addressed to me that told me that my father and I were going on a road trip in America. So we hopped on a plane and flew over here, and we ended up in Denver and drove from Denver up through the Rocky Mountains to Northern California and then down PCH to LA. And I fell in love with America at the age of 10. We went to Disneyland, we went to Universal Studios. We hung out with my dad's best friend, who was an ex-cop, ex-racing driver, ex-Marine, just this very cool dude called Ed Felter, who's still my father's best friend. He now lives out in Arizona. And Uncle Ed, as he's known to a lot of people, kind of gave me a little insight into what life is like in America for fun, and what you can actually get out of living over here. And I remember going home, and a couple of days after we got home, and I couldn't sleep because of jet lag, and I woke up crying, and my mother came into my bedroom and said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "I want to live in America. I don't want to be here."
Wow.
And so it was always kind of a dream to come here. So I guess what that gave me, to your question about what made, what was saying yes about that, was yes to the opportunity to go and enjoy some time with my father, but also, enjoy the opportunity and embrace the opportunity to take what America can give you. I think that's always kind of been an inspiration for me ever since that time.
When you're on those long road trips with your dad and you're explaining that story, and I can't help but think that on these long car rides, you're taking account of your surroundings, seeing the beauty around you in this country, which you were articulating on and why you love it here so much. But the idea at that age, where here you are going on these expansive road trips and seeing the world and taking note of your surroundings, being able to really focus in on that and be attentive to that, how do you think that that's actually helped you now, and doing an extra job or a more important fixation on your surroundings and be more cognizant of it, more conscious of it, and what it can all provide, based upon you being able to sit back and explore and see the world in a way in which you did at a 10-year-old age?
So before I answer that, you see, this is your talent, because, as I said, you've listened and then you ask a really engaging question. This is what separates you from me. I mean, you have this ability to be able to do that. So I take my hat off to you for that. I remember driving through somewhere late at night, and I'm sitting in the passenger seat of this rented vehicle, and it's throwing down with rain, and we've reached some traffic, some standstill traffic somewhere in the mountains. And I remember looking out the window and seeing a guy with his thumb out, and he was hitchhiking, and he's soaking wet, and he's got a bag by his feet, and we drive by him slowly because we're in this traffic. And I said to my father, "Why aren't we stopping and helping him?" And he said, my dad said, quite reasonably at the time, "I don't know who that guy is, and I don't know where he's going, but we've got a place to go. So, I'm not trying to paint a picture of my father being a nasty dude, because he's not. He's quite the opposite. He's very loving and very cool." But I think that's always stuck with me, and I think it's kind of given me, speaking a little bit kind of arrogantly, it's given me some empathy. I remember thinking, I wish we could help that guy. And I think what that's kind of helped me with throughout my adult life is thinking, how can I help you understand what I want you to do, or how can I help you do what I want you to do? And I think empathy is a much perhaps sometimes undervalued attribute. I think it's what stops people, in the street when somebody falls over and you go and help somebody. But I think in the workplace, what it does is it helps me understand. I have to explain what I need in really simple terms to get the best out of people. I remember being told once, there's a British Army general who led the British Army during Desert Storm, who was asked, "What's the secret to great management?" And he said, "Pick good people, give them simple instructions, and let them get on with it." And I've always believed in that. And I think it takes empathy to really be able to follow through on that. Having the confidence in being able to kind of give somebody a simple brief, and then allow their talents, their skills, and their experience to bring that brief to life. And knowing that you don't have to kind of micromanage, and that you don't have to kind of be poring over all the details every single day. I think that's what empowers people to do great things. And I do think it kind of goes back to that, one of those moments where, I'm kind of watching somebody and thinking, I wish we could help him. How can I help that person? And I think that's probably one of the things that's helped me continue in my journey throughout life.
How close is your mind to being a photographic memory?
Nowhere near at all. Except, actually, that's a really good question. I have this amazing ability to be able to spot faces in crowds and know that I know that person. So it translates in some ways, really pointless ways. I see minor celebrities out and about, and I know who they are, and I can spot them. I might not always be able to put the name to the face, but I know that somebody's famous when I see them. There's a woman who was in a movie called High Fidelity, which is a John Cusack movie based on a British book about a guy who owns a record store, and he goes on this voyage of discovery with ex-girlfriends where he tries to kind of catch up with them all. I guess he's trying to kind of make good on his bad past. One of the actresses in that movie, who plays a small role, but she's one of his ex-girlfriends, is, and I can't for the life of me remember her name now that I'm on the spot, but my wife and I were running our dog in a park in Austin 7 years ago, and it's kind of dusk, so the sun's gone down and it's getting dark, and there's a woman in this park sitting on a chair looking at this flock of birds, which are native to some part of Austin and apparently are very famous. And I catch this glimpse of her, and I said to my wife, "That woman's in High Fidelity." And my wife says, "What's High Fidelity?" And I said, "Okay, well," so I have to back up and explain the movie. And I go up to this woman and I say, "Hey, I'm really sorry. Are you in High Fidelity?" And she says, "Yeah." "How on earth did you recognize me?" So that's my photographic memory. The rest of it, I have no photographic memory at all.
What is the percentage of which, when you have those instances come up where you're able to figure out, okay, I remember where I saw that face, that you go up to that person?
Oh, always, always. That's mainly because I like hanging out with famous people. Yeah, always. I don't think there's anything lacking from that, unless they all very obviously don't want to be, disturbed. I always go and say hi and how are you, and just so that I can brag about the fact I've met somebody famous.
I am so impressed by the detail of your storytelling, and I think that you have very much a closeness to having a photographic memory, because the way in which you're able to take me into places when you were a child and set the scene with such a vibrant illustration, it's no wonder that you're in an industry where you are able to not only set the scene for others to succeed, but also to be in a place of storytelling as well, where you're able to do this now with pickleball. And when you think about, you talked about your father and the influence that he's had on your life, where do you find that comes out the most?
It's another great question, and I think you're being very generous. I wish I had a photographic memory. I can't remember. I can remember pulling at math, or as we say in Britain, maths, for example. And I think people with photographic memories maybe have that a little bit better than I do. So my father is. It's a very good question, and it's one that's actually prompted me a couple of times to want to do a kind of podcast about parents and about kind of the influence your father has on me. To the extent where my wife bought me a microphone for Christmas one year. I've never done it, and I now feel even more guilty about the fact that I haven't done it. But my father is he is constantly frustrated that I'm not an entrepreneur. He is always asking me and suggesting, "Why don't you go and do your own thing?" And I think, if anything, kind of what I've rallied against is is perhaps the confidence that he had to go and do his own thing, whether it succeeds or whether it fails. I've always felt more comfortable within the environment of, I guess, a more kind of concrete organization where somebody is kind of telling me what to do, and I'm given the kind of direction of other people around me. I think as I've increasingly got through my career and as I've got older and been lucky enough to kind of reach the maybe higher echelons of kind of leadership structures, I've realized that actually, you don't need to have people telling you always what to do. If you've got a sense of where you want to go and what your vision is, if you can articulate that in clear ways to people, then you can achieve hopefully great things. And I think that kind of comes back to what you're saying about maybe an ability to be able to describe something. I put that more down to the fact that if I don't describe something in that level of detail, I'll probably forget it. And I probably won't tell actually what happens. So if anything, I'm explaining those kind of things more for my own benefit than for somebody else's benefit, just so that they actually understand what I'm talking about. Otherwise, it would all just be confused nonsense, I suspect.
How hard is it though, Ben, because you and your father have differing viewpoints on the way your own career should go, that you've had to live with the fact and how that might have changed, in fact, your relationship with your dad, knowing that you continue to do your way, which is maybe not always in alignment with him, but the idea that you know that he has something else that he wishes you would have done. How do you weigh that feeling as you're doing your own thing, knowing that in the back of your head, he wants you to do something else or try something else?
I suspect there isn't an individual out there in the world who doesn't wrestle with that question every single day. It's interesting because I think I meet people who have, utter self-confidence, and I've been very lucky enough to work with a number of people who betray no sense of doubt in anything that they do. They're often the people that kind of keep their foot to the gas. They can be very difficult to work with sometimes because they're the person that calls you at 7 o'clock on a Monday morning and says, "Why didn't we do this?" Or the person that kind of texts you now in 2023, or has been for a long time, texts you saying, "Hey, I've just thought of this and I've just thought of that." And perhaps how it manifests itself with me is a lack of confidence in my own abilities. But as I get older and older and kind of less concerned about what other people think of me, perhaps that confidence is starting, that perceived lack of confidence is starting to be replaced by a sense of kind of, if you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. But I'm going to kind of stick to what I do. The great thing is, my father does tell me, how proud he is of me and my brothers. But you know what? We're British, so it's all about stiff upper lip, and you don't, you don't get brought up in a culture which is, telling you that you love your children all the time or whatever that kind of stuff is. So there's a bit of that to it too.
So then when does he bring out that teddy bear side? It's there. Whether you put up the guards, you put up the walls, how do you crack it?
Oh, I can tell you there was one amazing moment which I've shared with him. I've never really, and I've shared with my wife. I've never really shared kind of outside because who cares in my kind of small world. But 2014, I was working for a Formula One motor racing team, and owned by a Malaysian billionaire. We'd had 5 years. We were in our 5th year of competition, and we'd had 5 years of utter failure. We'd never scored a single point in Formula One, and this is not meant as a disrespectful to any of the folks, hundreds of people that worked tirelessly for that team to try and achieve something, but we just never ever achieved any of the goals that were really set for us, in terms of kind of establishing ourselves as a Formula One team. Very difficult world to be in, but we just hadn't achieved what we set out to. So we get midway through the 2014 season. We'd raced in Hungary, amazing venue, great race. Came back from the Hungarian Grand Prix, back to our factory base in Oxfordshire in the UK, drove into work on the Monday morning after we'd finished the race on the Sunday night, and found that the team was being taken over by some people who were making cuts immediately, and I was out of a job. So got home that afternoon, feeling very sorry for myself, wondering where on earth I was going to go next. Formula One, much like any of the many other sports, is a bubble. Your whole world is kind of consumed by that existence. All your friends are there, your girlfriends, your relationships are all kind of within that environment. So not only are you losing a job, you're losing a life. And I had a very good bottle of red wine that I'd been saving for a special occasion, and I just opened it and my phone rang, and it was a woman called Katja Heim, who very sadly is no longer with us, but Katja was a bit of a legend in Formula One circles. And she called me and she said, "Tom, I need somebody to go to Austin to go and help with communications and marketing for the Grand Prix venue in Austin, Texas. Do you know anybody?" And I got to as far as, "Yeah, when do you want me on a plane?" And she sort of went, well, hang on, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I've just lost my job. And she said, oh, I didn't realize that. She didn't speak. She had a German accent. I won't try and do that for you. My acting skills are not up to that. Long story short, I ended up moving to Austin. I went back home to get my visa sorted out in the UK, went to see my father to say goodbye to him, feeling very, very emotional about the fact that this dream that I'd had since 10 years old was coming true. I'm moving to America, knowing how proud my father was going to be of me. And I got in a taxi from his house in a town called Guildford in Surrey. And he walked out the front of the house to wave to me goodbye. And I looked back in the taxi, and as we were driving away, he put his arm up like that, kind of. It's like the Breakfast Club, right? It's like the Judd Nelson bit at the end of the Breakfast Club. He wasn't wearing a trench coat and he didn't have his ear pierced, but apart from that, it was very similar. And it was really like, God, really emotional, a really special moment for me, because he didn't need to tell me how proud he was. That said everything. And that kind of, I don't need to hear the other words from him. That's the moment that told me that he was proud of what I was doing. And if I never hear that again, fine, because I know I've achieved one of the things he wanted for me, which was, I think, maybe to live out maybe what was a dream of his. So yeah, that's it.
What a beautiful vignette of a story that will be forever embedded in your soul, and something that I feel like powers you every day, considering the effect that had on you, and that father-son validation. Being able to have a dad like that, and you see him and you feel a validation that's so empowering to you. And as we wrap up this conversation, Tom, there was one last question I wanted to ask you. And that is, when you're on these trips and you're having these conversations with your dad and you're going on the freeway and there's these long hours and you're looking around and thinking to yourself, my dad and I are together for all these hours, what are you guys all talking about? What are those conversations like that would give us a sneak peek into what we could learn more about when it comes to you and your relationship with your dad?
There's one I should tell you about, and I can tell this. I think the statute of limitations is probably passed on this. So, 15. The age of driving in the UK is 17. At 17, you can get a license. So, 15 years old, my father and I are driving through France, and we'd gone to follow the Tour de France, the latter stages of the Tour de France. I can't remember what year, but the American rider Greg LeMond was in close competition with a French rider called Laurent Fignon for the title that year. And we were driving through France, somewhere, Burgundy, it could have been anywhere. And we stopped at a restaurant for lunch. And my dad decided lunch was probably more liquid than food. So downed a couple of bottles of red wine and got into the car and then said, actually, I probably shouldn't be driving anywhere. So do you want to drive? And I said, sure, yeah. And he had this BMW 635 CSI at the time, a very cool, powerful, big German car. And I got it. I knew how to drive. My dad had been teaching me how to drive since I was very small, because cars are his thing.
Yeah.
We set off from this little French village somewhere, and I think we were heading towards Paris. And we're on the auto route, a couple of hours into this journey, and my father wakes up and he looks across, and apparently I'm doing 130 miles an hour.
Oh my gosh.
15 years old,
Oh.
just about see over the steering wheel. And he's like, you got this. I'm sure it's absolutely fine. So I think the reason he was confident in me driving this heavily powerful German car at such speeds illegally without a license at a very young age was majority of our conversations were around motor racing and cars. One of my dad's friends growing up was a guy called Nick Mason, who's the drummer in Pink Floyd. And Dad and Nick used to race cars together. And Dad had kind of grown up in around cars. He was a journalist for a long time. He wrote motoring articles for the Financial Times in the UK. He edited car magazines, and he bought and sold race cars. And so I have a kind of, gas flowing through my veins, because my father had kind of put that into me at a very young age. So I think most of our conversations were around, racing drivers, racing cars, cyclists, great bikes. What's a decent red versus a bad red to drink? Where you should stop in little French villages for lunch, and great parts of the world to go. So we filled the time, much like this kind of conversation feels like it's gone for, we could have talked for hours, but
Yeah.
it's been minutes. So I think that was probably it, mainly around V8s versus V10s.
As we conclude here, I started off this conversation by saying that a book by you should be in the works. I think, considering what we were able to cover in this conversation, we would get quite the interesting book, considering you talking about your relationship with your father and the memory that you have that you are not giving yourself enough credit for, because the way in which you're able to still recall those intricate details is something that I don't see very often when talking to other humans, considering that there are all of these stories that seemingly you make it sound like it happened yesterday, which is a talent of yours that I think that people, when watching this, are going to learn. But at the end of this, it's about figuring out how your brain works and where the creativity and the genius comes. And I feel like we were able to hit on that on many fronts. And you have been taking that steering wheel of your life to new heights, as your father would say, as he watches over his shoulder with no level of concern when you were going 130 on the freeway. Tom Webb, Chief Marketing Officer at the APP. I'm Bryan Fenley with Tennis Channel and a pickleball broadcaster. Thank you, Tom, for doing this, man. This was a lot of fun.
Well, thank you. I've really enjoyed this. It's been great. Thank you very much.